I'm a regular watcher of YouTuber David Carroll, and he often makes a point in all of his videos about the Negro not wanting solutions. I can come to that same conclusion myself from observing black people over a course of 20 years, and there's a psychological reason for this. The main reason why a lot of black people don't want solutions is because they do not know how to get their needs met, and they do not know how to meet their needs on their own. So they remain stranded inside of this codependent relationship with dysfunctional white people like white liberals and white supremacists in an effort to get their needs met. Um, a lot of black people who grew up over the last 40 years don't understand the concept of doing for self and empowering oneself, so they remain inside of this codependent relationship with dysfunctional whites, such as white liberals, Democrats, even some Republicans, and others racists like white supremacists and other white people. And inside of a codependent relationship is it's a relationship where one person has power over the other one, and they are doing things to by the other person's terms. Really, a codependent relationship is one where one person gives away all of their power, and both really are vying for the position of the victim. And if you really look at race relations in America, it really is both two groups of two races of people playing a victim game. And the Negro black people really live to be the victim. They live for this victim position because for them the victim position is a position of power. Just like the racist and the liberal, being a victim is a position of power. And as both individuals engage each other, they get involved in this blame and shame game where they point fingers at each other. And what black people do in order to get their needs met is they like to blame the victim. They like to go out here and play this march and protest, shuck and jive, as I call it, blame and shame game. And then they shame white people who have economic power into giving them crumbs, job opportunities, and they do this then job opportunities in schools, scholarships, whatever they can get from that, from whatever outrage that they have. And this is the way codependent relationship works. It's like I've been saying in several other videos about the battered wife, um, and what she does, and what her and the husband they go back and forth, where that one blames the other for the other being in a situation. In a situation, the wife blames the husband for being in the situation. The husband blames the wife for being in the situation, and they point fingers at each other. They get into arguments. They get into fights. He beats her up. Then he says, "Look at what you made me do." And then after he beats her up, he starts to feel guilty. He starts to feel sorry, and then he goes out and buys a whole bunch of apology gifts. And then he promises not to do it again when he's giving her the apology gifts. That's what he does. And if you look at race relations in America, it's the exact same thing. You have white people who do things to black people, and then after the black people start crying and complaining, you have white people coming out and saying, "Oh, I'll never do that again. Here's a government program. Here's a job training program," and it's all disingenuous. It's not neither side wants a solution. Both sides really just want to continue being the victim because for them, the victim is a position of power. And I came to this observation, and just watching black people, but really what cemented it for me was watching the 9/11, the aftermath of 9/11, where I saw the same codependent pattern starting to pick up when we were trying to build the World Trade Center here back in New York. Every time people tried to create a solution for rebuilding the World Trade Center here in New York, the victims' families would come right back out and tell them they couldn't build a certain way, they couldn't do this, they couldn't build another office tower. They couldn't build certain places. They couldn't do certain things. And it got to the point where nothing was getting done. This is one of the cruxes of codependency. Codependent people don't want solutions. And this is what I saw with 9/11. They didn't want, they weren't getting anything built. The reason why the building is ran into cost overruns was primarily because the victims' families kept coming back and they kept saying that there was a problem, there was a problem, there was always a problem, and the problems just kept mounting and mounting until eventually things ran into they cost overruns, but nothing was really getting done. And the same thing happens with black people today. Nothing is getting done because everybody's codependent on white supremacy. And if you look at the social construct of white supremacy, um, it's really, you have white people on one side blaming black people, and you have black people blaming white people, and neither side really wants a solution because they enjoy being the victim, they enjoy having someone to blame, and they do not know how to get their needs met. If you look at a lot of the people who are in that group of white supremacists, white liberals, none of them really know how to get their needs met. They don't know how to build any enterprise without that enhances their own community. They only know how to build stuff that exploits other people. If you look at the liberal, his whole thing is he lives to exploit poor blacks, foreigners, and other peoples, and he usually makes 95%, 97, 98% of his money on poor black people. I mean, the liberal, his government programs, most of the people who go through them are black people, and there's a good majority of people of color, but this is how he makes a good chunk of his money. And he needs black people in that submissive position, and he also needs them in that victim position. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it all relates to why black people don't want solutions, because if you solve the problem, there is no more profit for either of the codependent groups, because codependent people like being the victim, and this is how they get their needs met. But if you solve the problems, if you solve all the problems, if people start taking responsibility for themselves, what happens is there's no more money for any of these people, and there's no other way for them to get their needs met. And if you show with the codependent black person, what it is if they show they can be responsible for themselves, they start to get scared, because codependent person, again, they don't know how to do things on their own. They get, and when they start getting shown that it's actually possible to do for yourself, this is why they hate people who do for themselves, because people will start asking them, why don't you do for yourself? It's just like the alcoholic. Why don't you go to AA? Why don't you go and do something for yourself to help yourself? This is why black people don't like people like, I'd say, Bill Cosby, because he's not preaching the message that they want to hear. What they want to hear is, well, this is what codependents and alcoholics like to hear. I'm a victim. Somebody did this to me. Somebody did me this wrong. And you hear it on the white side too. These niggers did me wrong. These niggers taking my jobs. They don't only use say the niggers. They also use Mexicans, um, Arabs, any group. They play this blame and shame game with other peoples too. And again, they need those peoples as their scapegoat because they don't want to take responsibility for themselves. And this has been why so many black men and black people have been lynched and had their businesses burned down, because these white people on this other side, again, didn't want to take responsibility for themselves. They didn't want to take responsibility for their actions, and they wanted to have somebody to blame. And this blame and shame game really, long term, has been destroying America. If you look at the state of America, we are falling further and further in the bottom, and black people are further and further backwards because of this blame and shame codependency game. Because the whole thing with a codependent person is they will take you on a race to the bottom, because they don't want responsibility, they don't want to solve problems. All they want to do is play the victim. And as long as they're in the victim role, they feel powerful, and they feel that they can shame people into meeting their needs and giving them whatever they want. They never feel they have to work for anything. And the Negro does not want a solution, because he doesn't want to relinquish that victim position, because if he starts doing for self, he starts to get insecure, he starts to get scared, and he knows if the victim position is a safe position for him. And he does. He's a lot of people, who, especially if they grew up in single mother households, they grew up raised in the victim position, believing the victims. This is the culture that they have been taught by their mothers and in some cases their fathers, that everything that has happened to you is somebody else's fault. And they grow up believing that they're victims and never thinking once, you know, I have to take responsibility for myself and responsibility for my actions. And that ultimately, at the end of the day, I am responsible for me and my state in the world. But what we have with many Negroes, what we have is they've learned this whole victim culture, and it's reinforced by the white liberal media, and it's also reinforced um, by the social interactions that they have with other dysfunctional Negroes. And this is as far as early as childbirth, not even childbirth, about 2, 3 years old. This is what they learn. This is what they're taught. Because again, this is what their mother, this is the culture that their mother teaches them. And what happens when you have a codependent person? Because many of the relationships many African American women have are codependent relationships. They're not, interdependent relationships where both people are responsible for each other. Because if you look at the guys that they get involved with, he's coming from a codependent home, she's coming from, and then they're forming another codependent relationship. But codependent people, again, do not want a solution, because solving the problem means they can't be the victim. And when you solve a problem, that means you're going to have to start taking responsibility for your part in the problem. And this is why they don't want solutions, because if they have to take responsibility for their part in the problem, saying, look, I did that, I made that mistake, um, I'm responsible for that, then that means somebody's going to have to look at me and say, hey, that's my fault. But, Negro doesn't want anybody to say it's their fault. They want to point the finger. And just like the racists want to point the finger, white racists want to point the finger, white supremacists want to point the finger, and the white liberal wants to point the finger. They want somebody to blame because they don't want to look at themselves. Because I looked at the history of race in America throughout, and this is what I've seen from, your Klansmen, your white supremacists, even some of your businessmen. They want somebody to blame instead of saying, look, it's my fault. I needed to take a look at this. I needed to do a little bit more research. Or I needed to really listen to some of the people I have working for me who were telling me this is a mistake. But they never want to take responsibility for themselves or the decisions that they make. So they point at another group. They point at the Negro, or they point at the Mexican, or the Arab, or the Chinese. But they never look at themselves and say, look, I made these decisions. Just like the Negro never says, I made these decisions. The decision not to go to school, or the decision, you know, not to work with other people, or the decision not to do what they need to do. But this is what codependent people do. They never want to take that responsibility. And they always look for an escape. This is what the alcoholic does, and this is what the batterer does. They always look for somebody else to blame for their problems instead of saying, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for myself and I'm responsible for fixing the situation no matter what happens. And the Negro doesn't want to take that type of responsibility because it requires him to take responsibility. He doesn't want to do that. He wants to have somebody to blame. This is what the liberal teaches, enables in him. And this is what they do. They go back and forth with each other, like the battered wife or the alcoholic wife. Um, Fixing, and then it's like what you have with the liberals. He plays this fixing and caretaking game. Oh, I'll fix your problems. I'll caretake you. But really, he's exploiting you for his own personal profit because he's getting the big chunk of that government program, of those government programs, of those nonprofits, job training, all those little crumbs that you're getting from the table. He's getting a big slice of that cake because when the government allocates that money, that pity money, apology money, as I call it, because it's the same thing as the battered wife. When the guy beats his wife up and then says, I'll take you on a cruise around the world, or I'll take you on a vacation somewhere, or I'll buy you a fur coat. It's the exact same thing. And what he does is that he takes that cake, he gives that, and then he takes that cake, and then you get the crumbs. And this is what the Negro gets, but because he does not want a solution, but he doesn't want a solution because this is how he gets his needs met. He never got his needs met. If you look at a lot of Negroes, they never really understood about how to get their needs met because they never had this modeled for them. So they don't understand, getting up and going to work, getting up and starting your own business and doing what you need to do for yourself. All they understand is, playing this pity game where you play the victim. And this is what the civil rights leaders also teach. You're a victim of somebody else. But the whole thing is that the whole victim paradigm in codependency is, as I said, I think about in this video before, and even several other videos and blogs, it's a race to the bottom. And eventually, with your alcoholic or your batterer, they hit rock bottom. And at the rock bottom point is usually when a lot of them either have their wake up call or they die. And when I'm looking at the country with this whole race situation and it being a codependent relationship, because this is what racism has evolved into. If you look at racism over the last 40 years, it is evolving into a codependent relationship where one race has more power over the other one, you know, and both of them are playing this blame and shame game where they're saying you're responsible for me being in this condition, and the other one is saying you're responsible for me being in this condition. And nobody wants to take any responsibility for the direction of the country. The country, like when you have an alcoholic or a batterer or anything, nothing is getting done because everybody's playing this blame and shame game. Meanwhile, America's becoming less and less competitive, and it's becoming it's becoming a race to the bottom, and that's why everything is regressing because we're playing this game back and forth, and nothing is getting done. Nobody's focusing on the long-term goals of the country. Nobody's focusing on what direction we want to go in. And this is over the course of several presidents. Just this whole race issue is choking the life out of the country. And if you look at it, other countries like Indians, the Chinese, the Russians, Middle East, they're starting, and even South America, they're starting to become more economically competitive, and we're becoming less economically competitive because we're playing this game of going back and forth with each other. And with this whole Negro situation, the Negro is the biggest problem because he does not want a solution. He does not know how to do for self. He does not want to know how to do for self because if he shows that he can do for self, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. If we started showing black people doing for self, because that's the whole dysfunctional. That's why America is on a dysfunctional trajectory because we have these white liberals and other business people who and other business people like these foreign store owners and other businesses like Hair Weaves and all these other companies. They make a boatload of money off of this Negro, and they build their wealth on his misery. They exploit it, and if he starts doing for self and starts building his own economic systems and his own economic infrastructure, a lot of those people are going to be out of work. And because if black people start making their own products and start building their own companies and start doing things for themselves, that means Mr. Liberal and his government programs, we don't need your government programs anymore. We don't need your welfare. We don't need your food stamps. We don't need, you know, black folks living in poverty. That means we have a community that's middle class, and we have our own infrastructure, and that also means competition. That's the other reason why nobody wants Negro to come to a solution because if he starts building his own stuff, then they can't compete with him. And when you look at the Negro, he really, a lot of them, they're mentally damped. There's some mental issues because, again, codependent people, they just don't want a solution. You can offer them solutions. You can make suggestions. They're going to shoot them down because they need to be the victim. Because as long as you're the victim, you're in that position of, this is what they believe mentally. They are in that position of power. They believe they are in control. They believe they have leverage. They believe they have advantages. But the irony of this whole situation is when you are in the victim position, you actually have less power. You actually have less control. and you have to do whatever um, people are giving you. You have to take whatever they give you, and you have to do whatever they tell you to do, not what you want to do. You're not in control. You're not doing anything on your terms, and you're just being dictated to, because this is what a victim does. Victim has to do, like when a battered woman goes to the police, she believes she has power because she can put her husband away, but she really doesn't have any power. The law is just going to just go through the motions and follow procedures because you made the statement. But you have no power. You would have more power by walking away from him than you would having to go through all this legal rigmarole. And this is what the battered wife does. She will go back and forth, and with this, but she really doesn't want a solution. She really, because when you start offering her solutions like, oh, just divorce the guy, then she'll start talking about her husband, or the kids need a father. But when you put logical things, saying he's presenting a model of a pattern of abuse, he's hitting you, but the kids need a father. This is the codependent. This shows you the clear codependency that's going on. Same thing with black people. When you ask black people, just stop shopping at that store, that foreign-owned store, what they do is tell you, but where am I gonna go? Where the black-owned stores? Man, where the black-owned stores? You get these type of codependent responses, and they don't want a solution because, again, solution means they have to take action on their own and do something for themselves. Um, Same thing with the community with the other things. They just don't want to take that responsibility. Cleaning things up, doing things, because if you show any sign of responsibility, what their greatest fear is that if they show any sign of responsibility, that somebody's going to come and take away the government programs and the crutches that they've. Because I look at it this way: a lot of people use the government programs as a crutch to carry themselves, and they're afraid if they take away the crutch, they're going to fall. And this is the great fear of the Negro: is that they fear that if they lose their government programs, if they lose their job training, if they lose the excuse of white supremacy, and now there is white supremacy out there, and there is racism out there. These social constructs do exist. But if I can't use these excuses, people are going to start looking at the Negro and asking him to take responsibility for himself and his situation. That without the crutches, he's afraid he's going to fall. What he's afraid is he's going to fall back into a state of poverty, and that's what everybody. That's another fear that's had, and this is what This is the trajectory the United States is on. This is what codependents do. They're all afraid of change, and they're all mostly afraid of taking responsibility. They're afraid of the change that taking responsibility is going to do, but they don't understand that the change is a positive change, and when you take the crutch away and you show you can stand on your own 2 feet, it's going to help you grow and allow you to move forward in your life. But right now, as long as you've got the crutch under you, you're not able to move as fast as you can, or move as effectively as you possibly could. You're actually limiting your potential and preventing your own growth. And that's what happens when you are in a codependent relationship. These people, usually, a lot of cases, because they're on a race to the bottom, a lot of them, it takes them losing everything and hitting rock bottom for them to reach that point and understand that the actions that they're taking are detrimental to them. Um, but what happens is that in the extreme cases, a lot of times somebody has to die, like the alcoholic has to die, or the wife has to die for people to realize that their actions are destructive. And the sad case is it usually has to go that way because they don't know how to solve problems on their own. They have no problem solving skills. They have no critical thinking skills. Say, look, this pattern is destructive. This direction I'm going in isn't working. And this happens. This codependent relationship between blacks and whites, and it's been going on. I'd say even further before. I mean, ever since Jim Crow was established, but it's become more prevalent because codependency was never defined as a psychological term until the 1970s. But I could see traces of it at the start of Jim Crow. I could see Just looking at the behaviors, looking at the actions of both white people and black people, I could see it clearly. You know, like when they talked about the Great Migration, you had, white folks taking black people off trains. That was a sign of codependency right there. Why would you, if you hate black people, why would you take them off of a train if they were leaving? Again, that's a sign to me that says I don't want to take responsibility for myself. That me being left alone means I have to take a look at myself. And this is one of the things that both black people and white people don't want to do. They don't want to take that look inside. They don't want to do that self-examination. Negro especially does not want to do that self-examination because that if he looked inside himself, he would find the solutions for many of his problems. If he confronted his issues, he would find the solution to many of his problems. And white people would also, if they looked inside, a lot of the poor whites who came up during the Jim Crow, they didn't want to do that because that meant making painful decisions, taking that self-examination. Self-examination is a very hard thing to do. I had to do it myself when I was younger. I had to do that, and it was a painful process. And you have to come to the conclusion that you are the one making these decisions. You are the one taking these actions, and you are the one who's ultimately in charge of your own fate. But a lot of people don't want to do that. They just want, especially codependent people, they would rather blame someone because blaming someone is easy, and you can say it's not your fault. It's that person's fault. When you look at race relations in America, that's what it boils down to. Nobody wants to deal with the emotional pain of the past, and nobody wants to deal with the decisions that they have made in the last few decades. Because this is again, this is what I see, this is what I've observed, this is what I've gotten from studying history, and this is why I believe you really need to add some psychotherapy for many of these Negroes because you can't give them a person a solution until they can acknowledge the problem. This is where rock bottom comes in because usually it's when people hit rock bottom that they understand that they um, have to acknowledge their problem. They have to acknowledge they have a problem. Because a codependent person is never going to acknowledge a problem until they hit rock bottom. It's not until one of them reaches a point where they've lost everything that they have to admit, hey, I've got a problem, and I need to start taking responsibility for myself, and I need to deal with my issues in a program where I can deal with these issues. Like I deal with psychotherapists, a guy like the Iceman, and AskTheIceman.com. You need to talk to a guy like that, or you start taking constructive actions, like you saying, look, if I want to get this job, I need to go to school, or I need to enter a rehab program or something. But when it comes to race relations, I don't think anyone has hit the rock bottom point yet, especially the Negro. I don't think the Negro has reached the point where he's hit rock bottom. We kind of got there with the Emmett Till situation, and that's what led to a lot of change. But I think people got, it was just they haven't hit the point where they've gotten to the point where they're going to say, look, we really have a problem here. And I think white people also have not hit the rock bottom point. Even though the country's in decline, they haven't hit the rock bottom point. Yeah, some people are making money, but if you look at the country overall, people are working harder for less money. The middle class has been eroded, but I really don't think most of the people in the country have hit rock bottom where the point where they're going to say, look, this racism is holding the entire country back. It is keeping us all from being competitive. It is keeping us all from growing as a people and as a country. And eventually, it's destroying us. If we ever got to that point when they could acknowledge that it is a problem, because a lot of people don't think that racism is a problem. They just think, oh, I just don't like this black guy. I just don't like black people. It's not, they're in denial about how everyday racism is destroying people and how institutions like Madison Avenue and Hollywood are choking the life out of us by promoting these false images of black people and how it's preventing the entire country from being the best it could possibly be. I mean, I look at America and it's it's slowly declining, especially in the black community. The Negro is the one who is suffering more than anyone in the world because he just likes being the victim because he thinks that the victim is a position of power, even though for the crumbs that he gets, we could be a lot further if you just stop taking the crumbs, pull the crutch out from under yourself, and just start standing up. I mean, this is the big problem that a lot of people, but they won't do it because psychologically they believe that they're the victim. They believe the victim is the position for black people, but you have to start coming out of that victim way of thinking because the victim way of thinking it'll suck the life out of you. It'll keep you from growing. I know this from personal experience. Um, Ever since I was 7 years old, I mean, I've had to deal with the victim, people trying to put me in the victim position. But because I had this brain aneurysm when I was 7, and when I went back to school, they were trying to put me in special ed and trying to say I was slow and trying to say I was handicapped. But my mother would not let me do that to myself. She would not let me be this victim and get into this victim mentality because it's not going to help you grow. And I know this from a personal experience. And what happens is you stay in that victim position, you're never going to be the person that you could possibly be. You're just going to be getting crumbs from people. They're going to keep feeling, and you're going to get people feeling sorry for you. And you don't want people feeling sorry for you. I can tell that from personal experience too. You just don't want that because eventually pity turns into contempt. And that's also um, what really happened. That's what a lot of codependent people do. Eventually, the wife starts to pity the guy she's pitying. She eventually starts to hate him, and that's another part of codependency. I know I'm going off on a lot of tangents, but yeah, but you don't want to be in this victim position. This victim position just chokes the life out of you. It sucks the life out of the people around you. You become just it's an annoying. You become a nuisance eventually, and eventually people start having contempt for you. They just start to hate you. And I really think that's a big part of a big core piece of racism is that a lot of people they hate black people because they see them as victims and they pity them because that's when you have this paternalistic view that a lot of white white supremacists have, and they grow to hate the person because they never see them grow, they never see them change, and then the thing is that they want the person to change on their terms, and that's what they want them to do. They want them to change on their terms, and they want them to change in the way they want them to be. And when you literally look at the whole concept of white supremacy, that's what the core of it is. You want the black person to be what you want them to be. You don't want the person to be what they actually are. And the Negro's big problem is that he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't want to know who he is. He wants to be the victim because he believes that's who he is. But, you know, I look at racism and I look at the all of it and from a panoramic picture, from the big picture, and I see all these psychological issues related to race and race relations in America. And I really look at black people on this. They don't want solutions again because that means breaking away from that paradigm. And I think that breaking away from that paradigm scares not only the Negro, but it also scares white people because it means you're entering uncharted territory. Because breaking out of a codependent relationship means everyone is responsible for themselves. Everyone has to stand on their own 2 feet, and everyone, because that means that the playing field is truly level. Um, and that scares a lot of people. That means you're responsible for yourself. That means there's no finger to point. That means there's no blame and shame game. That means there's no more crumbs. That means all of you are going to have to start putting seeds in the ground, growing your own wheat, making your own bread, building your own factories, and then selling to your own people. And that's a scary situation for especially a lot of people who are just working poor or even middle class, upper middle class. Even for the wealthy, it means a whole new paradigm, new economic paradigm. It means a new business paradigm, and all of that's scary for people. That means coming out of what you knew. And this is another reason why Negro doesn't want solutions because he means coming out of what he knew. and where he came from, and what he was raised with. And when you have to come out of that, what happens is it's uncharted, again, uncharted territory. And this codependent situation is like the devil they do know. And if they have to come out of that and go into this, now it's been done before, but for this generation of Negroes, they don't know what this is. I mean, it's something they've read about in history books. They have never experienced it. Now, guys like me who've grown up and we were trying to do this, because I understand that it's historically possible to start your own businesses and build your own community. But a lot of black people don't understand this concept. For them, some of them have never even read about, the black-owned businesses of Black Wall Street. They've never read about towns like Rosewood. They never read about, companies like Park Sausage. Yes, Park Sausage was black-owned at one time. They've never read about, because I've read books like Think and Grow Rich and Black Bourgeoisie and Our Kind of People. And I use these books as research for books that I've written, like The Thetas or The Temptation of John Haynes. And I've used information in all those books for writing for the books that I write right now, those books that I just mentioned. And I understand that it's possible, but for a lot of Negroes, they've grown up with this codependent pattern. They've never understood that it's possible to break free. And I don't think they're ever going to understand that it's possible to break free without a psychotherapist to explain it to them, because they're mentally conditioned to believe that they are victims, and the only way to do things is with the help of a white liberal enabler who they are, who they think. I need to say that. Well, what it is that they need. The only way they think is out is through, you know, a white liberals government programs. But the irony is, you wind up even more dependent because you're going to this. Why are you going to the person instead of going out for yourself? That's the whole irony of it. Is you're going to someone for help who isn't trying to help you, and this is all detrimental to the Negro. And he has to start looking at himself and start saying, you know what, this paradigm is dysfunctional. This paradigm that I'm in this life paradigm does not work. And there's simple actions. I mean, just like Dave Carroll talks about, just stop shopping at the foreign-owned store, stop buying the sneakers. Now, this is stuff I did, in my late teens, early 20s. I started seeing the pattern myself, and I just stopped doing these things. I mean, like I said in another video, I don't go to Fordham Road. I don't go to these foreign-owned stores. I try to, if I can possibly go to a black-owned stores, and I try to do businesses with black people whenever I can. I mean, I used to attend when I had money. I used to attend shows like Circle of Sisters, and where there were black-owned businesses, or you know, and I would try to bring that money back. And I would, this is how I solved the problem. This is where I would try to solve the problem. Even when I was in college, I would buy all my comics from a black vendor, and this is what I've been doing. Um, because, but with a lot of black people, they don't want to take this type of action, because for them, the idea of a solution again means taking responsibility for themselves and taking responsibility for their station in life and their situation in life, and getting your own needs met by you, um, the way God intended. God intended for us all to be responsible for ourselves as individuals, but this is what the Negro doesn't want to do. He wants someone to do things for him, and then he also wants someone to blame. And and as long as somebody else is responsible, they don't have to be responsible for anything. So, but the whole thing is that when somebody else solves your problems, they're going to profit off you. And this is what the liberal does. This is what the government programs do. They profit off of you, because I worked in nonprofit also, and they get a whole bunch of grant money. Um, they get a whole bunch of grant money to get you ready for jobs. They get a whole bunch of grant money for job training. They get tax write-offs for even hiring you. This is what the Negro doesn't understand. There's a whole bunch of money that you could have made for yourself that other people are making for themselves off of you. Because I work in nonprofit for a job for Strive, the job readiness program, and there's a whole bunch of money. There's that grant makers make off of you. They get tax write-offs for this money that they donate as grants and endowments or donations. They get a whole bunch of money. The companies that give them the jobs and job developers, the companies themselves get tax write-off for hiring certain types of Negroes. Um, you know, they get tax breaks for doing this, and building businesses in your community. This is another thing that they do. They get tax money, free tax money, and tax breaks, tax write-offs, and grants. All this money is made off the Negro because he won't solve his own problems. It's all gravy. Big businesses. This is why they can open up, big stores in your neighborhood and just getting rich off of you because. I mean, even if the business fails, they still make a whole bunch of money in tax returns in proportion to other stores, and it's only when the store starts making less money in proportion to other stores in other parts of the country that they close it down. But usually they have made so much money in tax issues and tax deductions and other things like that, tax write-offs on them, because that's what they have in the online application. They ask you, like for Target and other stores, especially in inner city areas, are you a veteran? Are you receiving TANF, or are you receiving SNAP, or are you receiving these type of programs? And they make a bunch of money off of you. And the whole thing is the Negro doesn't understand that if he made his own businesses and own community, he would get that money. He would get his own money. He would make his own money. These guys wouldn't make that money off of you. And these job training programs and these job training and all this other stuff, they wouldn't make any money because they also get paid by the government to solve the Negro's problem. All these people making money off of you, but you don't make any yourself because again, codependent people don't want to solve a problem. Codependent people just live to be the victim. They live to blame others. They live to shame others. They live to point the finger, and they love to play this finger pointing game with each other as they continue to race to the bottom. And when you're at the bottom, and usually when people hit that rock bottom, it's when they have that moment of clarity. But it doesn't look like the bottom is in sight for this Negro anytime soon. I mean, even though it's been 50 years since we've started this vicious cycle, I mean, I'd say the vicious cycle actually started during the start of Jim Crow. Um, then that's when I really believe the vicious cycle started. But it was more violent back then, and I see it, regressing right back to that state. Because again, it's like a vicious cycle. Um, you know, the blame and shame game, because the blame and shame game goes in cycles. Um, and right now, it's going right back to the Emmett Till, and even I'd hate to see it go to the whole Ku Klux Klan lynching people, burning towns, and all that other type of stuff that happened in the early 20th century, because no one wants to take responsibility on either side. Both sides are caught up in this whole victim mindset. Like when you had during the Reconstruction, you had black folks they were actually building stuff up. They had political offices, they had businesses, and it wasn't until after they pulled it out that's when we really started to see the codependent pattern really start. With white people saying, "Oh, those look at those niggers, they've got stuff. I'm gonna lynch him. I'm gonna kill him for he thinks he's an uppity Negro. He disagrees with me." And this is where you see the root of this codependency right there. These guys feel powerless, and they want to take their power back, and they don't want to take responsibility for themselves or for their situation. This is where the codependency started on the white side. But on the black side, it started, I'd say, in the 1960s. But the white side, the codependency started there. And they wanted to keep this paternalistic relationship. And then you had with black people, They didn't like the idea of black people being responsible. That's what these racists, um, this is the way they thought. This is the way they felt. They didn't want to take responsibility, but they didn't understand that they were going to be obsolete anyway. They were going to be in that poor situation anyway because, Industrial Revolution had already come, and the agribusiness of the South was already obsolete. And that's what because the Civil War, again, we're still feeling ramifications from it, but the agribusiness of the South was already obsolete because the U.S. wanted to get competitive, and the North, they were trying to get competitive because you had England going into India, you had the Europeans were going into these other parts of the world, Pacific Rim and Asia, and building trade routes. So the U.S. wanted to get competitive with them, but the Southern agribusiness didn't want to do that. That was one of the core reasons for the Civil War. A lot of people think, oh, it was about, um, you know, other things, but it really was about economics. It was about taking the U.S. in a direction, um, and the South's direction, which was slaves, agribusiness, that really wasn't going anywhere because everything was becoming machinated or with machines, and infrastructure needed to be different all across the country. The country needed to be united, but you had the South that wanted to be separated. But that's where the codependency started because a lot of white people were put out of work. They saw the black people adapting. They got upset. They didn't want to adapt. They didn't want to change, and they wanted to stay with the old Southern tradition. And a lot of racists, even in the North, didn't like the idea of competing with black people um, economically, and they didn't want black people to have businesses and stuff because it meant they would have direct competition from black-owned businesses. So it was on both ends, and that's where a lot of this codependency comes from because it's all really based in economics. But because nobody wants to work together, the country, as it stands, is falling apart. And this is even with your so-called black presidents, like Barack Obama, because nobody is on the same page. Nobody sees that the country is falling further and further back. I mean, I look at things like our education system. We're behind the rest of the world. I look at um, our businesses. We're not really producing anything significant outside of computers and entertainment. We have not come up with a new innovation, I'd say, in 30 years. And we're in trouble. But I know I'm going off on tangents again, but it all correlates to why, this Negro doesn't want solutions and why the country's in a bad state because why everything's going backwards. But because all of it is intertwined, everything is codependent. And, I mean, everything is interconnected. That's what I meant to say. Everything's interconnected, but when you have most of your people caught up in a codependent relationship, they are wallowing in so much self-pity. They can't see how the actions of each individual indirectly or directly affects other individuals. Um, and in the black community, you see that, you know, more so than anything because everybody's so busy being a victim, they cannot see how the actions of one black person affects other black people. And when what one person does, indirectly or directly affects all the people around them. Um, and if people started seeing that, maybe we could start solving the problems in the black community. But again, the only thing keeping black people from solving the problems is their inability to acknowledge that a lot of black people are causing the problems. And but again, they don't want solutions because if you have to take a solution, that means you have to be responsible for your actions. And codependent people, again, don't like being responsible. A codependent person will make every effort to point a finger at someone else. A codependent person is going to make every effort to blame and shame others because, again, this is how they get their needs met. Because when they were small, when they were like small children, they saw the only way to get attention was to throw tantrums, to argue. They saw their mother arguing with people. They saw tantrums being thrown. They saw people rushing to them to placate their needs or to take care of their needs. So they don't know how to do anything. Was to make a lot of noise, and there you can't get your needs met by making a lot of noise. You have to, if you want to constructively get your needs met as an adult, you have to create constructive solutions. You know, taking responsibility is core to that, and saying, look, this is the problem that I'm having, and this is what I have to do to solve this problem. But a lot of Negroes don't know how to solve any problems on their own. They don't know how to do that because they're so mentally conditioned to going to a government program or going to the government or going to somebody else or somebody's thing, not understanding that this course of action works against them and is detrimental to them, because all you're doing by going to someone else is making them rich at your expense. Um, but I know I'm talking going on a lot of tangents here, but they all tie together. But when you look at Negro and his inability to solve problems, this is why. And again, I believe that black community really needs a psychotherapist to take a look at it. And I mean, I believe America overall needs a psychotherapy, because it's clear to me that there's a codependent relationship between white people who believe like liberals and white supremacists and most of the black community. And as long as this codependent relationship remains intact, the black community is never going to grow, because nobody's going to solve the problems, because nobody's going to acknowledge the problem. All they're going to do is continue to deflect and play this blame and shame game, and just keep going back and forth, and nothing is ever going to change. Because I look at the black community, especially over the last 40 years, and that's the condition it's in. It's just stagnant, no growth, no progress. There's superficial things here and there, but no real growth. I mean, because they want to hold on to the crutch, they want to believe that they're the victim, and they want to continue going back and forth with people who aren't very helpful to the growth of the black people and the black community. This is a really long video, but I had a lot to say in this video, and I really wanted to make these points. I mean, I did write a blog about this a couple weeks ago, and the blog is a lot shorter than what I'm talking about in the video, but I'm trying to reach people through the video, and I was able to hit on some points in the video that I did not hit on in the blog. On the blog, I just straightforward just said, I just talked about the codependency, and I talked about that as the main reason, and it is the main reason. But we really need to look at the issue of race from a psychological standpoint. We really need to look at it, I'll say this again, from a mental health standpoint, because there are some serious mental health issues in the black community that need to be taken a look at, and we really need to look at mental health in America and stop seeing it as, a stigma, social stigma, and start seeing it, because it has a clear impact on, from what I've seen, on a Negro, this psychological thing. And it has nothing to do with slavery or anything like that, because again, like David Carroll said in one of his videos, the family was intact, and I've read a lot of historical context and different books, and yeah, the family was intact. And even if you watch old black movies, yeah, the family was intact. This codependent pattern, again, for white people, it started with post-Reconstruction and after Jim Crow. And for black people, I'd say it started after the Civil Rights Movement. And this whole race issue needs to be examined through the eyes of a psychotherapist who is objective, and they'll probably come to the same conclusion about, race and codependency and codependency being the primary reason why the country is not moving forward and why the country is not growing and why black people don't grow. Because I know I've said it several times in this video and I've said it several times in other videos, but codependent people don't want solutions. They love being the victim because the victim position means they're getting attention, one. Two, they have a possibility of getting their needs met. And three, they have the spotlight shined on them. This is why you always see um, black people always ready to come out and march and protest whenever something's going on, whenever they believe something is going on. And you never see anybody saying, I'm going to take care of this on my own, or I'm going to take care of these problems, because they can't get the spotlight on them. And this is what the codependent person does. They always want that spotlight. They always want that attention, because it means that there's a possibility that they might get some apology gifts, apology trinkets, and on a larger scale, apology government programs, apology jobs, apology things. But that's not how healthy people get their needs met. Healthy people get their needs met by building their own communities and working together. And this is something Negro doesn't understand how to do on their own. I mean, this generation, I would say. Previous generations did know how to get this done, and they were living the American dream. Just about to live the American dream. Many black people, because if you read Black Bourgeoisie or Think and Grow Rich, you will read about these type of people. And even if you read historical texts about people like Ida B. Wells or I forget, Mary McLeod Bethune or Charles Richard Drew, you will see these type of people in history and see that it is possible. But the problem is, many Negroes are so disconnected and out of touch from their history and themselves, that they can't see that it's possible for them to build their own communities and have that type of thing. And a lot of people, they've actually given up and they say, oh, it's not possible, when it is possible. It's just going to take rolling up your sleeves and doing what you have to do. And I'm not just saying that just to say it. I'm trying to do it right now. I'm trying to roll my sleeves up, trying to build this publishing company so that people can see that it's possible for black people to control their own image and present themselves to the world how they want to be seen, and not how the liberal wants them to be seen or how white supremacists want them to be seen. Um, and that's been my mission ever since I was 17 years old. That was one of the things I wanted to do in life, and it's been a lot of work. But I had to roll up my sleeves and do it. I had to it's a lot of work, and you just have to get up and do it. It's gonna mean, but black people don't want to go through that type of work. They want everything instant. They want somebody to give it to them, and nobody's going to do that for you. The only person who's going to do for you is yourself, and the only person who knows how to meet your needs is yourself. And until a Negro understands that, they will never be able to solve their problems. Now that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.